Alright, so this video is an improved version of my Minecraft video. I only have one Minecraft video. It's the second video I ever posted, right? I'm just remaking it, but way better. It's been like 2 months in the making. I'm making this intro right now, and I can tell you, like, it's a really long video. The next part that I'm about to transition into is just me like playing Minecraft and looking at all this stuff just for the sake of matching the original. And with all that out the way, I guess I can get into the real part of the video. Honestly, I can't talk off of a script, so this whole section is going to be pretty much unscripted. I mean, I kind of know what I'm going to say, but honestly, it's going to turn out better than if I had a script. These windows were supposed to be encasements for these pillars, but then I realized it wouldn't work, and I'm not good at interior design, as you can tell. I also built this like 3 months ago. So it's just a corridor actually into this room, which has all of the blocks. So if you look in your inventory and you look up Chiseled, it's the same block at the start and end. The only difference is the name, and also this one has silverfish inside of it. But these are like bookending what I think is the history of the game. So this wall here is like the very start of the world, before really anything existed. I think it's pretty typical beginning for like the very start of the world. Usually it starts with darkness or chaos, and this one goes darkness and then chaos and then calm. So I think that makes sense as a progression from nothing to, I guess, something. This was the newest type of chiseled block added to the game. This is resin. Obviously it's supposed to be a creaking. I initially thought, like when I was trying to make connections or whatever, I thought it kind of looked like a bastion. It's obviously not a bastion, so there's really no reason for me to keep this part in, but I just wanted to mention that. Alright, this is the creeper, this is the wither, this is the wither skeleton, and this is a snout, most likely of a piglin. These seem to get hotter. Like, I can imagine red sand being hotter than regular sand because, you know, like being more red is associated with being more hot. I guess this one's kind of blue, but it looks like it's like burnt to a crisp kind of, or maybe it like cooled off at this point or something. The mobs depicted also seem to get more humanoid, and these also seem to get more man-made. Like this, some like caveman could scratch this into some sand. Then this one looks like straight lines and whatever. Definitely looks like it would take some skill to carve that. This one even more so, and this one I think looks the most pristine out of all the nether blocks, and it's also the last block from the nether. So I think this is definitely where the switch between being in the nether and being in the overworld happened. Quartz did come from the nether, like the quartz ore is only in the nether, but quartz as a block isn't found naturally anywhere, I don't think. And this just looks like a really fancy design. The rest of these are very clearly overworld blocks. The next 8, they're all variations of the same block. So it starts with regular copper, and then it gets more oxidized, which is kind of like gaining age and experience and like wisdom or whatever. So like the society is progressing, and that's represented by it becoming more blue, more like old. Like obviously if a society is older, it's typically like more advanced. Then it restarts, but this time these are all waxed, so they're like unchangeable from the form that they're in. So they're more certain in the direction they're going. Like I still, after all these months, I still don't know how to word this, but they're like more confident in what they're doing. Then the cycle just repeats again, and then you get to the bookshelves. Now, I think these represent intelligence because of books have like information in them. It's often associated with intelligence, like especially in the motivational images. And then more books represent more intelligence, but every one of these slots can be filled or not filled with a book. So it's not like there are only 2 options. And actually, if I go all the way out here, you can see there's actually 64 different possibilities for how these can be filled. I actually went through 5 different iterations before I realized that this is just binary, so I could just use that to fill this in. I tried doing like calculations over here before I realized that. So this building that I built here, it could actually be a lot bigger if I had decided to add a column for every single one of those possibilities. So this is knowledge, this is more knowledge, and this is just the ending, I guess the present. Honestly, that recording was a lot better than I expected, and that's just scratching the surface, and I'm going to leave it to my future self to explain that in a little bit more detail. So using all the information there, through several iterations I managed to come up with this chart. I made it in Microsoft Paint, and by several iterations I mean 2, but this one doesn't have questions. And this version has different colors for the different sections, which may or may not come in useful later. Those questions I mentioned are the questions that are still left unanswered from that whole section there. Now I will warn you, I still wish I could go more in depth, But if anyone watching this wants to debunk this or confirm it, any of the stuff I say, then I'm fine with that. Then I have some disclaimers. The first one is I'm not much of an expert, like I'm no game theorist, but I really just want to get this video out at this point because it's been holding back my other ideas for like 2 months at this point. And now I don't have a smooth way to transfer into the next disclaimer, but I don't think it matters if these blocks were naturally generated or not. They all seem to generate in random and unrelated structures. Like for example, the infested chiseled stone bricks only generates in igloos, and a bunch of them just never generate altogether. So there might be a little bit of context I can get potentially from where they spawn, but it will be minimal and I don't think it contributes much. And the last disclaimer is I don't know why they're in this order in the inventory. It's not like related to the age, it's not oldest to newest or newest to oldest, and it's also not in alphabetical order. So there's definitely some weird way that they figure out the order otherwise, like the item ID or something. But based on the fact that I said item ID, I think it's clear that I'm not good at knowing anything about the technical side of Minecraft. So even though they definitely didn't, for all I know, they chose the order, which may contribute to thinking there's like a hidden message that will reveal something. Okay, so the first question I put here was how many of the bookshelves were there supposed to be? Now for this one, all you really have to do is think of whatever makes the most logical sense or what would actually reasonably happen. So for this, there's a few possibilities. There would be one, which is where it's only completely empty or only completely full. There's two, which would be both of those. There's six, which would be either one in each slot or the thing filling up like a power bar. And there's seven, which would be six, but you add one where it's just empty. And there's 64, which is just all the possible combination. Because there's not a lot of evidence, then a lot of this is inevitably going to be guesswork. So I'd say it has to be one of the extremes because everything else is too specific without anything really pointing to it very strongly. The argument that it would be only empty is because that's the only one that shows up in the inventory. But then you would wonder why there's even the option to have books in them if it never actually happens. And then if there's the option to have like all of these 64 possibilities, why would they exist if they don't use them? So I think it makes sense for it to be all or nothing based on the limited evidence, and also why I think that there's supposed to be 64 or maybe more because it actually gets more complicated. If you remember earlier, I said that bookshelves would represent intelligence. They're the only block here that, like, very clearly, if anything, would represent intelligence. And more books would mean more intelligence. And the wording here is kind of weird, but I think it represents, like, where they became enlightened and they became aware that they're, like, at their pinnacle of their knowledge. So they came up with a new and more efficient way to document their history, like a new system. And the new system would last for 64 of however long those time periods are if they used every possible combination. Also, by the way, I don't know how long those time periods are. There's just not a lot of evidence, but, like, I would guess 100, but I really have no idea. But it's not very clear that all of these combinations are like linear, like after each other. So I think they would have a more complicated way that they figure out exactly which books go in which slots based on what happened during that time period. But at this point, it's actually getting to seem a lot like I'm just making all of this up, and I want to avoid that. So the closest thing I have to a final answer is that they somehow evaluate like how successful they were or what happened during that time period, and then they add specific books that's somehow according to that. The next question is kind of redundant because I'm pretty much working backwards, because the whole first section here, the second section I guess, was just about what I thought they represented, but I already wrote the script, so I'm just going to say what they represent without going any further. This does actually maybe reveal some more stuff, so I'm just going to go through them. So the chiseled stone bricks is just a design. It's just like a target kind of. It's just not supposed to represent anything else other than squares. Chiseled deep slate is apparently supposed to be the old warden design. I don't really see it. It looks a little bit like some of them, but there's not a lot of similarities. I don't think it looks like the warden. It's probably not supposed to be that. It does look a little bit like a shulker, but the materials needed for that are like deep slate, which isn't in the end, which is where shulkers come from. So they're not anywhere close to each other. So I think chiseled deep slate is also just a design. Chiseled tough is supposed to represent the breezes. That one's kind of obvious. That's like one of the only times that the structure where it spawns from actually provides useful context, because that's also where breezes spawn, which is a wind themed mob. And the next one is chiseled tough bricks, which despite having a longer name actually represents less than chiseled tough. It's just empty. Again, just a design, just chiseled tough but without the wind. Chiseled resin bricks obviously is supposed to be the creaking. I don't know why I said bastion earlier. It's not the bastion. Resin comes from the same biome as a creaking, and it literally has a creaking face. bricks, and this one is just no question. Chiseled sand has the face of a creeper on it. The stuff underneath it is probably supposed to be some sort of writing, but that's really anyone's guess what that says, probably. Like, this is another one. There's no question of what mob is pictured here. Chiseled red sand has the wither on it. Chiseled nether bricks has a wither skeleton, and you can tell because the regular skeleton has a wider mouth and it has a nose, and it doesn't have like the stripes, so it's obviously a wither skeleton. Wither skeletons also come from nether fortresses, which have nether bricks, so I really don't need this much evidence for something so obvious. The chiseled blackstone is a little bit less obvious, but it's a snout, which is almost completely certainly for the piglins, because piglins come from bastions, which has blackstone in them, and they have snout because they're pigs. And the chiseled blackstone was actually the last one to be based on a mob. And if you notice, they actually do become more humanoid the further down you go, but I'll get back into that a little bit later. So chiseled quartz looks a little bit like a guardian, but for the same reason that chiseled deep slate isn't a shulker, it wouldn't be a guardian, because it's from the nether, which can't even have water, and the guardian is from an ocean, so like polar opposites. And I think it's just supposed to be a fancy design, which a lot of the rest of them are, because all of the coppers are the same thing. It's just supposed to be a design, probably to represent structure or something. And I'm sounding kind of like a broken record, because it's not all supposed to represent something deeper than what it looks like. So chiseled bookshelves is obviously just a bookshelf. And finally, the infested chiseled stone bricks is the same as the not infested counterpart. It's just a design. The second last question is who actually designed these? Now, obviously, the developers at Mojang would have designed these, but I mean in-game. That's kind of cringe to say that. But anyway, I think the real answer is I don't know. Like, this question has been holding me back from completing this video for such a long time, and I can't think of anything based on like the limited evidence. If I wanted to, someday I'd make like a part 3 of this where I can add in some other stuff, because chiseled blocks aren't even the only thing that has designs. For example, like pottery shards and banner patterns and glazed terracotta, and I can even think of some connections between those. But going off the chiseled blocks, there's just nothing that says who made these. I don't know a lot about what people think the ancient builders are, but that's probably, if anything, that's what these would have been made by. I haven't watched any other theory videos that are anything similar to this. Oh man, that was a horrible lisp. But it's very clear that the Minecraft world was like lived in before you spawned in. So maybe it was like whatever the villagers' ancestors were. Maybe it's whatever the zombies were, or whatever the skeletons were when they were still alive. I don't know. That's a really disappointing answer, but I just really want to get this video released. And the last question is a very broad question, basically the question that like decides if any of this is valid in my opinion or not, and it's, do they actually tell you about the history? And I think, yeah, they do. Now, obviously, I'm not going to make a video this long just to say that's all wrong, but I think the designs, especially the ones with mobs, make sense that they're in a linear like order. The first mob that's depicted that I care about is the creaking, which is basically a tree with arms and legs. It's like a very simple life form. It can't even live without being connected to something, and it's basically just plant matter. And the next one is a creeper, a slightly less simple monster, but it's still made of leaves, and all it does is like walk around and explode. And then it's like a bit of a big jump, but then it's like a 3-headed flying skeleton thing. And they've all gotten more complex, but not very humanoid yet, until you get to the next one, which is just a smaller version of the wither that has a human-like skeleton. Now, this is probably the ancestor of the modern-day skeletons, so that rules out skeletons as being what the ancient builders were. And then the last one that explicitly is a mob is the piglin. And the piglin is a mob that wears clothes and has flesh, has a big nose, and trades goods for a certain mineral. And there's a baby version and a zombified version. Does any of this sound familiar? Now, this is where I start sounding a little bit unhinged, but it's not even that big of a jump from piglins to villagers. It's like the same distance from all the other mobs, from like a creeper to a creaking, wither skeleton to piglin, and that's why I think that the villagers are a distant descendant of the piglins. Now stay with me. There's no monkeys in Minecraft, so this is like the next best option. And if that's the case, I don't think piglins could ever build anything, and that means the only option left for what the ancient builders are whatever the zombies were when they were still alive. Or it could be like a missing link between piglins and villagers, or it could be just villagers in the past. Previous question is a little bit more close to being answered, but still I can't think of anything more than that. But anyway, now I'm answering other questions with this one question. That's just how packed of a question it is. I can't think of anything for what the breeze and the warden could be. I mean, those were loosely depicted, the warden more debatably. I couldn't figure out anything if I tried, but there are two complications that I would be willing to address with this. Number one is, how is this a line of evolution? Because the wither doesn't seem like the next stage from a creeper, and some other stuff. Now, there are 3 different theories that I made. The first one is that it's just some weird mutation, and somehow the creepers just became withers, and then the other 2 are very similar. one of them is that the creaking and the creeper are just like a subplot type of thing, and it's unrelated to the villager family tree, which actually starts with the wither. And the other one is the same thing, except the wither and the wither skeleton is a subplot unrelated to the family tree starting with the creaking. The one starting with the wither, though, it seems most appealing because it goes nicely from the wither to the wither skeleton, which is a fellow humanoid just like the next stage, the piglins. But the creaking line makes equal sense if you look at it close enough, because the creeper and the creaking have very similar names, and they're both kind of leaf related. But then it's a little bit jarring to go from the creeper to the piglin. But if you remember, creepers are actually based off pigs, which is what the piglins were also based off of. And I get they don't look like that anymore, but maybe it makes it make a little bit more sense. I think thinking that it starts with a wither is a bit more possible because it doesn't stretch out anything and rely on what mobs they were based off and what they used to look like. And also, if it started with the creaking, then the wither and wither skeleton would just be like cutting into that line. So that's why I think that either it starts with the wither and goes down to the villager, or the creaking and the creeper, the wither and the wither skeleton, and the piglin, and potentially the villager. Those are all three different unrelated small lines of evolution. And the second complication is, if these are the ancestors or the villagers, why do they still exist? This one's actually kind of easy to answer. It's because they only exist in the nether, the ones that do exist. And I think that the nether is like the past, and the nether portal is a time machine. This is also a reason why I think it starts with the wither, because the creaking and the creepers still exist in the overworld, and the overworld is obviously the present, and there are probably still complications with this, but I'll ignore any of those because this video is already too long. If the nether is the past, then the end is probably the future. And that's why there's no chiseled purpur or chiseled endstone bricks or anything chiseled from the end. Even though there was opportunity to make that, they still didn't, because they only use it to represent what's already happened, and the end hasn't happened yet. That was horrible. So finally, after all that, I'm finally done talking. Almost. I still have the outro. Like I said, I might make a part 3, but I can't make any promises. There's a lot of other video ideas that I have right now that I want to get this one out of the way to make, and I would have to get those video ideas out of the way to make a part 3 to this, if I ever do. And I doubt anyone actually watches this far into the video, but if you did, just know I don't think any of this is definitively true, and you can do whatever you want with what I said. You can completely disregard it, or you can like be offended by it. I don't really know. I'm not a Minecraft YouTuber. I'm not a theory YouTuber. I just like to explain stuff sometimes, and I tried to keep this video organized as best as I could, but it's probably really unorganized, to be honest. This is like the second video I've ever made about Minecraft, and it's like my 20th video overall all time, or at least that I actually tried for. Anyway, subscribe. The end. Goodbye.